Hello, everyone. Blayne here from the MLS Fantasy Insider Podcast and the MLS Fantasy Boss Writing Team. I want to talk to everybody a little bit about the price change system and how to maximize your team value. This is a question we have gotten a lot lately from some of our newer players and even some vets that just want to know some basic strategies to handle navigating the early season, raising your team value without sacrificing your overall point production. This is a big topic we've had lately, and it's a big topic just to talk about throughout the season, but especially at the beginning, because one or two wrong moves can see your team value drop astronomically. I know I've already lost money this season, and I'm below the 100 million mark that you start with, which is a first for me. It can happen to anybody, even the vets. And so I want to give you some tips to manage this. And the first big thing you need to know is how to avoid price losses. And that's a lot easier said than done, but we've got a few baselines that we know about the game. Price changes seem to hinge around your player value. A $10 million player in the game needs a higher weekly average in order to maintain or increase prices. A 5 million player needs a whole lot fewer points to see increases or to maintain that value. We also have a 4 million floor that players cannot go under, but we have learned from experience that a player's value can actually dip below that 4 million floor, but they're going to be priced at 4 million in the game. So that's an interesting area to navigate as well. But we're mainly looking at the big name players and how to avoid losing prices. We know the game deals with a 3-week and a 5-week rolling average. It takes the two previous games plus the current game that they have played, and that's the round you're kind of looking at to see. So if you've got a $10 million player who has a 1 and a 2 in their average, they are going to need a monster score of 15 or 20 points in order to really maintain that 3-week average to go up. Now, the other two games in the 5-week average will play some into that as well. This isn't an exact science. We don't know the proprietary rules behind this, but this is just a general idea of what to look for. So if you've seen a premium player getting those 1s and 2s and those low scores, they're on a downward trend, and you want to kind of wait to pick them up until that trend flips and goes back to a more upward trajectory. Right now in the game, Carlos Vela just got a 1, and so that's huge. Even though the season just started, they're pre-filled with some dummy data that's supposed to help them maintain a little bit, but you can still see a drop based on one bad average. And that's what we saw. So when you see a big player on a slump with a lower average, you might want to think twice before you really go gung-ho on those. Now, if you think that player is going to have a monster week, don't sacrifice your points for that. Carlos Vela is a guy that can always go off, and he's a prime example to talk about with this because he is on a downward trend. He is set up for a price loss, a value loss as it goes. But if you think he's going to have that big game, you don't want to miss out on those points. Do not put team value above points in these instances. But if you're on the fence, if you're toss up between one premium player and another, team value may break that trend. And so avoid those players that are on a little bit of a downward trajectory. Don't spend on players who are not guaranteed to get good points. And there's always guys that are going to have a bad game when you expect them to have a good one. You just kind of have to worry about that. But use this for tiebreakers as well. So that's what we've kind of noticed is you need to score points equal to your value in order to maintain. Otherwise, you start to drop. Unofficially, I think it's closer to about 80% of your value. So if you're at 10 million, you need to score about 8 points to maintain. If you score 10 points, you're going to go up a little bit with the maximum of 0.5 up or down. So it's kind of at that about 80% is where I would say roughly after a few years on this system. But keep an eye on that. Your big names need to score more points to avoid massive losses. Now, sometimes it's worth taking the risk, and I'm not saying don't take those risks. It's just pay attention to what you're doing and try to offset that with price gains in other areas. Now, maximizing your price gains is the next big section that we have to talk about, and that's where players greatly exceed their value in points. A 4.0 player who scores 6 or 7 points in a game is going to generally net you a price rise. Now, it is going to take into account their most recent games, and for some of those 4 million players, that means they're going to have a couple of sub appearances where they've scored 1 or 2 points, so their average is not going to be as strong. But a monster game can really change that average quickly. Averaging a 7 or an 8 with a 1 and a 2 gets above that 4 million mark a whole lot faster than averaging a 3 and a 4 and a 10 versus a 10 million average, or a 10 million price. It's knowing when to look. So when you see a guy that cost 4, 5, 6 million score double their value in points, they're primed for a price rise. You can go ahead and stock up on those players. That's a good way to build your team value early in the season. Somebody's scored a lot of points, doesn't cost a lot, they're pretty much guaranteed the 0.5 that following week if they play. Players that don't play don't score or don't get price or value changes. That's just the way it is. If they play, even if they get 1 point, their average is going to be so much higher than their price, it's going to be worth it in the long run for you. So you have that, trading these off. Take your premium player that may be on a downward trend that you expect to have a good game, offset them by a player who has a much higher value gain potential and offset it. You may lose 0.3 with your premium player if he doesn't have a good game. You may break even, but your other guy's going to offset it and score you a lot more points than you expected. That's kind of the rules we've discovered in the game. It's not a hard and fast, you need to do this to gain value. You need to make sure you're doing this in value. It's something that I like to say in this part of the season, you break your ties when you're picking players by who has the best price gain potential. You may like 2 midfielders equally. You may think there's a good chance for both of these guys to get 6 or 7 points. Well, if both of them get 2 or 3, this guy's going to take a lot more loss in value. So I'm going to go with the other guy who's a little bit safer pick for my team value. And that's how you build your value early in the season. And then you maximize on those cheap guys. If you're not running switcheroos, if you're not running any of the special things, stash some of these cheaper players on your bench that are prepped for a price rise and just sit them there. Their points don't count if they don't sub in, but you can gain some value on that. So maximizing your price gains can help offset some of the losses, and avoiding the players who are set up to have a big drop-off is a quick way to do it. And the big thing to know is don't fret about value too much. It is an important part of the game, but it is not the most important thing. At the end of the day, having the highest team value in the game doesn't do anything if you don't have the most points to go with it. So do not sacrifice point potential overall for team value right now. You don't want to be making subpar picks and leaving way too much money on the table each week just to make sure you get more team value. You want to be getting those points as often as possible. Because the old saying goes, pick the best players and you'll have a better team value. That is true in a lot of senses, but early in the season especially, it can be very, very difficult to know who is going to go up and who is going to go down without these few tricks. And so watch the averages, see how they've been performing. Grab players who are set up for a price rise. Avoid players who are set to drop off a cliff if they have another bad game. And try to build that value as you go, because you can catch up in this. I have seen it where you can fall 2 or 3 million behind, and over a couple of rounds of maximizing your value and avoiding some losses, you can catch up to the pack without sacrificing a ton of your point production. You just have to know what to look at, and players that have an average of double their price are going to get you a pretty good return in value regardless of how well they play. Now, those players are usually ones that are playing really well, and they're going to get you some decent points as you go. It's not like you're sacrificing all of your production for your value, but you don't want to just take a bunch of $5, $6, $7 million players that have a really good average and leave 10 million on your bench to not do anything for you. You want to get points for those. You don't want to skip over all the premium players. But early in the season, you may not want to load up on 3 or 4 premium players like you can, and instead take 4, 5, 6 more moderately priced players that have a decent chance of scoring points and raising your value as you go, because you're avoiding that big price loss. A perfect example for game week 1 of this season is Hani Mukhtar versus Randall Leal. Leal was cheaper, Leal got more points, and he went up in value. Mukhtar, more expensive, didn't score as many points, went down in value. The trade-off there is if you picked Leal, you picked the right player and you got a decent price rise. This next week coming up, Mukhtar may have a better game. Leal may not have the points, but Leal's average is going to be so high, he's probably going to get a price rise again. Now that's a big trade-off. If Mukhtar has a really good game, he should get to holding his own, maybe snag a little bit of his price back. But Leal is prepped for a price gain. That may break that tie, plus he's got just as much chance to score points as Mukhtar does. Those two guys seem to share the points, and either one of them can go off at any time. So use your best judgment on these when you're picking players, but really, we want to focus in on the 3-week and 5-week rolling averages. Know how they've performed lately, know what their price is, and know if their average is around their price. If their average is much lower than their price over those last 3 and 5 games, you probably want to steer clear. And that's just the nature of the game. If their average is much higher than their price, definitely go grab those guys. And you may want to look for a few players like that to fill your team out with, so that you can guarantee you're going to get some price rise for those players each week. It'll help offset any losses you have. And over the past few seasons, we have seen anywhere from 1.5 to about 3 million gained at a maximum in any given week. So you want to kind of know that. Now there's weeks where you'll gain almost nothing. There's weeks later in the season where you may lose a little bit of value, but you've got the players you want. It kind of fluctuates, but early in the season, you want to be trying to gain between 1 and 3 million a week. I believe game week 1 saw the top earners making about 2 million. If you made about 1 million, you were doing fine. If you just broke even, it's okay. It's avoiding massive losses early in the season. So watch those premium players, know where they're going to get points, know who's set up for a price fall. Game week 2, Carlos Vela is definitely in that potential price fall category. He may show up and get you the points you expect, or he may be a trap and do that. So, again, depending on how you rate Vela, it's a trade-off between, is Vela going to score enough points, or do I like somebody else to score comparable points for a comparable price and not lose my team value? So you have to manage those two, but as long as you find a good balance between those two, you'll do okay. Don't stress over it too much, but use this knowledge as a tiebreaker when you're picking between 2 or 3 comparable players that you think have the same amount of potential to score points. Who's going to get you the most money? Who's going to avoid losing money? Those can be huge factors in how you do it. And just because somebody is a higher price doesn't mean they are more prone to losing points. If their average is better, you stand a greater chance of holding your value rather than somebody who's had a lower average. They may be a little cheaper, but that average is going to fall through the floor if they have a bad game again. So look at that. Hopefully this helps. We're always willing to discuss this type of stuff on any of the platforms. I'm available on Twitter. If you have questions, at me. I will respond. I love talking about this. This is a huge topic for me. And anybody on our Discord will also be more than happy to help. And I'm around there all the time. So I will probably chime in if you post a question about team value and how to maximize it. So hit up and use those resources. Hopefully this helps, and good luck building your team value.